was outside in the panel.
Yeah.
We're joined by John Kurtz. Appreciate John. Covers the hell out of the Big 12 and much, much more. John, what are your thoughts? Again, new things out there today. Well, we're going to want the first-round buys. You're not going to get that. Okay, well, we're going to want a little bit more money. We knew that. How much is too much? And is the Big 12 or the Big 10 and the SEC just continuing to be like a bad relationship already before it starts?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you guys having me on. I mean, I tell you what, it was sobering to read that article, even though most of it is stuff that we already knew. Like, there is some good reporting there. I'm not trying to run down the reporting that Ross Dellinger did at all, and he does an excellent job of just laying it all out in the plainest terms right now of what's happening. But, like, we knew they were going to ask for more money, a higher cut of it. And, well, I initially thought, well, hey, that number actually seems different than what Thamel said the other day. I went back and cross-checked that. I was like, no, I think I got my wires crossed there. It is pretty similar. It would be a $10 to $12 million difference per team per year from teams in the Big 12 and ACC and the Big 10 and the SEC. So, like, even that is kind of something that we already knew. But when you float it in the terms of, like, hey, for the conferences, you know, it's going to be a $300 million difference between those, and they're going to add even more, something I hadn't totally considered. They're going to add even more to that, to the disparity by just having more teams in there and winning more games because they're going to get $3 to $5 million a pop for all of that. It's like, man, I mean, that is going to be tough to compete with. And the other thing I think that's happened is, like, this week we got the Dartmouth story, which, you know, you might say, well, how is, like, Ivy League men's basketball really affecting all of us? Well, I mean, it's another reminder of where we're headed, and eventually, and I think it's going to be in the nearer future than what we originally thought, you're going to have to be paying the athletes directly from the schools. And now, if you're a Big Ten or SEC school and you're taking in an extra, you know, we'll say like $15 to $20 million from the college football playoff over your peers in the other two conferences, and then you've got the extra like $30 million from your TV contract that you're taking in, it's a heck of a surplus to be able to be doling out to players when now NIL is the most important thing out there. You know, I mean, I can just tell you from being around K-State circles, what I'm hearing about just K-State and the league. And if you follow, you know, guys like Trilly Donovan right now, who's so good with college basketball, you know, he's really talking up, hey, this coaching cycle is going to be all about NIL, you know, like what schools have the most NIL money, because it was important last year, but I can tell you the tenor on that has completely changed to where it's like, you know, 90% of the deal right now in recruiting. So all of that together, you just start looking at the future and you're like, man, I mean, that gets pretty tough to compete if you're a Big 12 or an ACC school, or obviously anybody else, because I think before there was this assumption that coaches would leave because, hey, they're going to have more money from the TV contracts. They already have more money. There's the prestige of it. Like, they're going to be able to pull coaches. And with the exception of Jed Fish, we just have not seen a lot of that with head coaches leaving the Big 12. But when it's like a more direct route to be able to do that, paying players, if we're going to get to the point where the schools are doing that, and now we're seeing how they're going to build that financial machine and financial advantage. So, yeah, it's sobering. I thought one of the most interesting quotes from that entire piece was an admin from the Big 12 or ACC saying, like, basically, like, I'm paraphrasing here, but like, do we call their bluff? Like, do we tell them no on this and see if they'll actually leave? That was a pretty fascinating bit of insight to me, because they've got to make this, what the article said, by the end of next week, get this all figured out. So, I mean, you think about what you're mulling if you're Brett Yormark and an AD in one of those offices right now. Like, your future is on the line here, and you got to think, like, do we tell them no and risk just cutting this off early? In 2 years, we will be quite literally playing in like a different league from all these guys. Or do we kind of take the breadcrumbs that they're handing us and hang on to whatever we can here for now and let them kind of dictate this power structure? It's a pretty fascinating decision that I think is going to come here pretty soon.
John, I'm just kind of leaning towards maybe they should do it. Just say it. Like, is that if at least if they break off, you know what their intent was the whole time, and you move on with your life, I guess, as opposed to constantly having to try to, you know, plan out different scenarios of what life is going to be like in the next decade.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Like, when I was first approaching this, and up until recently when I had been thinking about it, I was like, yeah, I mean, you know, it sucks, but you just got to do it and try and cling to as much relevancy with it as you can and take what you can get. And you know, we're just here. There's nothing you can do. Toothpaste is out of the tube. But it is becoming like more and more frustrating, especially, I mean, the first round buys, the automatic buys thing was just such a crazy power grab to try and get that, to be able to preserve your conference championship game, to get that money attached with that. And just such a, that really got called out by all corners of the college football world and national reporters and stuff, which I thought was good. And now obviously it seems like they're backing off that because of the pushback. But, more stuff like that starts to happen and you start looking at the reality of this. You're like, you're going to be, it's just hard for me to see a world where you're not just going to be a feeder system for them, when it comes to talent and coaches too, but especially the talent and players and all that. Like, maybe it is better to just cut the cord early on and try and carve out your own niche as whatever you're going to be. You will have a fan base, obviously, of all of the schools that are going to be involved in this that would not be in your quote unquote super league or whatever. And maybe they're, a lot of the people that just really loved college football for what college football was will gravitate a little bit more toward you, and you can still, I don't know what exactly it would look like, and it is a little depressing to think about, but maybe this gets you more of a head start on like figuring out exactly what that is and how you can brand that and market that, and just what you can have that would be different than what would maybe be a little bit more corporate kind of a college football super league thing. And this would like maintain some of the like idiosyncrasies that we loved about, that we all have loved about college football and college athletics here. I don't know. It's a really tough decision. It's above my pay grade. I'm glad that I'm not the one having to make those decisions, but I can certainly see the logic in it, much more so than before. And maybe some of it is just being presented with the reality of it, right? Like it was easy a year ago when you kind of could see all this coming, but you weren't totally staring it all in the face. And it's like, okay, well, everything still feels relatively normal in the space that I'm operating in now. And now it's here and you're actually like looking at it and you're kind of like, man, this does suck. Like this is rough. And so it can kind of change what your attitude is when you actually get there.
John, the Big 12 made like some forever enemies. Like you count them on less than a hand last year with all the Pac-12, just people that got embarrassed. And so there's like an anti-Big 12 rhetoric because they got embarrassed because of the way kind of things unfolded and their certain stance on it. And there's obviously some fan bases like Oregon State, Washington State, who are kind of angry because they wish they would have been invited already. So I've seen a lot of this. Well, all this is a result of the Big 12 breaking apart the Pac-12. Am I missing like 10 chapters here that I guess occurred that I'm not aware of? Because I'm 100% positive the Big 12 is not at the root of all of this turning into what it is into right now, much less their devouring of the Pac, because after all, there were more moves to the Pac after the Big 12 made their move, so or alongside that. So I don't know. I don't know how much you've seen of that, but I don't understand the Big 12 is at the root cause of this whole thing.
Well, believe me, I get some of it. I mean, I did my live show on Wednesday night and was getting a little bit of that from an Ohio State fan of all places, kind of coming in and saying, hey, like this is karma for the Big 12, tearing down the Pac-12, that this is coming back around and now your conference is going to be irrelevant. It could not be more misguided and off base. I mean, let's go back to what started this whole latest round. That was obviously the Big 12 getting the wool pulled over its eyes with Texas and Oklahoma. But even if you want to go before that, let's go back to, Nebraska, Texas A&M, Mizzou, Colorado that all left and everything that was happening there. Like people were trying to pull apart the Big 12 over a decade ago. I mean, it's been a long time that the realignment winds have been blowing, and it's always been involving the Big 12, with the Big 12 generally not in a position of power. So after a couple of rounds of being picked over, they punched back a little bit in a situation where it was that, kill or be killed. And it's ridiculous to pin much of the blame on that. I mean, the Big 12 was there waiting for the four corner schools, but the real key to it was that the Big 10 wound up taking Oregon and Washington. And that was a huge part of it, along with obviously a pretty incompetent commissioner of the Pac-12, who, by the way, I would highly encourage everybody to read John Wilner's latest piece, where he has some great sourcing on George Kliavkoff still taking zero responsibility for anything that happened there, which is pretty hilarious and indicative, I think, of his level of leadership. But there were so many other factors that contributed to it, and the Big 12 of anybody should not be blamed because it has lived 9 lives. People have tried to kill the Big 12 so many times. I don't know. That to me is just a really short-sighted. That's probably more an indication of how we all just can't think beyond, the last news cycle and the last thing that happened and remember anything in context or have discussions with levels of nuance. I think that's kind of like the sort of Twitter internet culture that
Very
we're all
much,
living
yeah.
in now, where that narrative comes from.
Yeah, it's the Big 12 is like the person that gets bullied all the time, and eventually they survive and they get tougher. That doesn't mean they're going to beat up the bully, but they're going to fight back, and they've done that multiple times.
How dare you fight back?
Yeah, like, well, wait a minute, you're not allowed to do that. No, screw you. We're not just going to have you beat us to death every single time, even though they understand what their weaponry might be or clout might be, whatever that score might be. They're just not going to lay down and take it.
I think, like I said at the beginning, I think it's just some hurt feelings from a particular corner. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, John, because I've seen a lot of that rhetoric, and I was just curious about that. But anyways, fellas.
Paul?
Yeah, John, I did want to talk a little Kansas State basketball with you because things did go awry this year for them. And it started with Naquan Tomlin, and we had you on and talked about that whole situation, which still has no clarity for fans or people covering it, and has created probably some unnecessary tension with Jerome Tang and the leadership there. And you've seen that maybe come out a little bit more in Jerome Tang this year than you would have in years past. What is your assessment of where things stand between him and the university, and just moving forward in what will be next season, since the NCAA tournament seems unlikely without a tournament win?
Yeah, well, I'm going to do this because it's a little cathartic for me. Naquan Tomlin's last 5 games, 28-7, 20-5, 21-8, 16-7, 17-3, shooting like 37% from 3-point range. It's kind of infuriating. They had that, and they had Quez Glover, who I think was going to be a really key piece of the backcourt, who never played. He played like a minute of an exhibition game, hurt his knee, got all the way back, recovered, and then hurt it again a couple days before he was set to play for the first time this year, right before conference play. A guy that was committed to BYU at one point in time. We see the season that they're having, and there were some NIL issues that forced him to back out there. So I say all that just to set the, I feel like Jerome Tang's taking a lot of shots, and some of it is self-inflicted this year, but people are really wanting to pile on because of how much of a star he was last year, how much bravado there was from the K-State fan base going into this year. But, man, we're talking about taking an NBA draft pick off of his roster, who I just rattled off what he's doing heading into the tournament for Memphis right now. Like, they had a tournament roster put together. So I would just say everybody needs to chill a little bit on the grandiose statements about what Jerome Tang is as a coach. He was 100% going to be in the tournament again this year had he not had a bunch of things out of his control go about as poorly as possible this year. Now, I'm not saying some of the drama that's come along with this season that he's totally faultless in all of that, but I just want to clear the air for a minute on all of that. As far as the relationship between him and the university, I mean, it definitely seems like it has calmed down some from where it was at, where there was all the concern about the president. I do believe that he and the president have met again since then. There was one clip, I'm trying to remember what game that was. I think it was BYU. When it beat BYU, and he went up into the crowd to do his, normal, hang out with the students thing, and he walked right past Richard Linton and actually, kind of dapped him up, gave him a little hug on the way into the crowd. I mean, who knows what exactly you want to make of that, but it seems like maybe the fence has been mended a bit. I think the bottom line when it comes to, the coaching carousel this time of year and what's going to happen with the future of Tang is really everybody seems everything I continue to hear is everybody across the country is so focused on NIL right now because they're realizing just how important it is, that it is 90% of recruiting, and you've got to have your NIL game in place. And K-State has done a complete, maybe 180 is the wrong way to phrase it, but they have gone all in on it in the last 6 months. That tone has really shifted from hey, we want to do this, but we also want to make sure our Hearn Fund donations, we have that stuff in place for facilities or whatever else it's going to be too. Oh no, we need to get everybody on board to donate everything to NIL. That's what it's going to cost. And, we may need $12, $13 million to field championship football and basketball teams if we want to have the type of season that we had, not this past athletic year, but the last one with an Elite Eight and Big 12 championship. So I think they've fully realized that, and they're doing everything they can behind the scenes to give Jerome Tang everything he would need with that. And I think that is probably just going to outweigh everything else so much more in terms of importance moving forward with coaching jobs right now. It's definitely the feeling that I get from everything I have heard about what's going on in the industry and at K-State right now. So because of that, I'm relatively optimistic. But man, I hate to say it. I know I keep referencing it, but like Trilly Donovan is so plugged into everything in college basketball, and I keep reading him say he expects it to be the craziest coaching carousel that we've seen in recent memory. So when he says that, I'm kind of like, I mean, who knows? Like all bets are off as far as what's going to happen there. But I'm not in panic mode like I was, one of the last times I talked to you back in January, whenever all that was going down.
John, next time that we see you and you don't give me a firm handshake and we catch it on video, we're going to put it up on social media and act like you are being distant to us.
Boy.
I've seen this back and forth with you and KU fans, and I get it. It's a fierce rivalry, and there's arrogance in one sport and arrogance in the other, whatever. But I mean, my God, it's going to be eventually we're going to eliminate handshakes after any sporting event because of how sometimes this can turn into. And there are some coaches who have absolutely ignored the person that just beat them.
I mean, it is crazy. Like we went through a whole cycle of it for an entire day, and I thought it was done. And then shout out to Tim Fitzgerald. Tim Fitzgerald comes up with an actual it looked like a local TV reporter who had gotten the angle of the actual handshake between Self and Tang and Lawrence because we didn't really get that on TV. And I was like, well, now we got the Zapruder film out there, and so we have to do this all over again because that's been leaked. And look, here's the deal. That is a part of the reason I brought up everything that Tang has dealt with this year because that's what made me mad about that. Like the Iowa State stuff. I mean, look, I would still fight you on some of it. And Tim Fitzgerald said this the other day, that stuff came initially from, he got fed that he said this on a public Iowa State show. So I feel like I'm not overstepping my bounds saying it. He got it from a national guy who said, I'm in a group text with other Big 12 coaches. And there was an assistant, I think at Oklahoma State that had said to get tipped K-State off on this, hey, watch out on this. So it was not K-State that was the only school in the Big 12 that was worried about what may or may not have been happening behind Iowa State's bench. But regardless, if you do that and it winds up going public because they see you arguing after the game, yeah, I can understand how that would blow up and maybe you should be a little bit more careful there. But he's already got this reputation, right? And so for Self to throw that out there, he knows the credibility that he has, the cachet that he has. And people are going to take that and just attach, Jerome Tang's a whiner. When, yeah, he did the exact same thing that Bill Self did after the game at K-State. Just a quick slap of the hand, move on by. We see it all the time. It's a complete non-story. I do think that some of it is that Kansas was upset about an incident that occurred in the tunnel in Bramlage when K-State won earlier this year that was between assistants, that they got a little mouthy with each other. So I think there was still some bad blood from that because you can see Curtis Townsend is the one in the line in the Zapruder film. If you go find that, Curtis Townsend is the one in the line who turns around and kind of is like, what the heck, even though it looked like Tang did sort of slap his hand. But at this point, I'm too far down the line of examining slapped hands and grassy knolls and all that. So I'll probably just bow out here on that conversation. But that is what made me so mad. I was like, Self knows what he's doing in running down the reputation of Jerome Tang by that for something that is a complete non-issue. And yeah, he didn't bring it up himself in the press conference, but he's getting asked questions about it by media members. And I don't know, man. It peak rivalry. That was peak rivalry stuff there. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I was just sitting here wondering while you're talking through that there between the basketball court and the football field. We just talked to Max Olson about, Leipold's new deal, and obviously Kleiman's got his thing rolling along. I know the Sunflower Showdown and everything that surrounds that rivalry has always been heated, but is this competitive-wise, hatred-wise, dislike, just competitiveness, is this as heated as you can remember Kansas and Kansas State being?
Easily. I mean, 100%, because, when I was growing up, so I grew up in Kansas City. I now live in Kansas City again, and that's when I feel it the most because obviously there's such a huge Kansas presence in the metro area and K-State strong too, but you just see a lot of it. And when I was growing up, it was just K-State just dominated in football, was winning 11 games every year in football, and Kansas was awful. And then in basketball, K-State had no shot to make the tournament. They were in the midst of the 30 game to, I think they got to 29 game losing streak against Kansas in basketball. So it was kind of like you just knew your place. You talked for a couple months out of the year when you were in the position of strength, and that was it. And then there was a while where, KU was still bad at football. K-State was a little better, getting more competitive, but Kansas was still obviously the national power. It was maybe turned up a couple of notches there, but I think what really started to change it was Kansas getting there in football. And all of a sudden, I would tell you, I mean, some of the basketball arrogance starts to seep into football pretty quick when, look, they're doing a great job. I think a lot of people are complaining about, was it Feldman that had Lance Leipold as the number 3 coach in the country? I mean, I'm not going to fight him being a top 10 coach. I think he's excellent, but you're also not the Kansas basketball program on the football field as of right now. So there's a lot of that. And then K-State has the year that they had a couple of years ago with the Elite Eight run, and Jerome Tang just pumped so much energy into the program too. It's like Leipold pumped a ton of energy into the program because of the fact that he won. Tang won and just breathed life into a fan base that has been beaten down by the end of the Bruce Weber era and just was kind of over it and not passionate about it anyway. So you had the perfect storm of just a lot of fuel getting added to both fires there. Yeah, I would tell you, absolutely, it is as hot as I have ever seen it in my life.
Somebody in the chat, Stuber27, the hatred is and has been there, but you're right, it seems to be with both the major sports. And we know what KU's done, how great they've been in tradition, and also what Kansas State with the Bill Snyder years. And it ought to be fun, man. It's awesome. John, as always, thanks for your time. Appreciate your patience having to bump you back a couple of different days. Have a great weekend. We'll see you soon.
Always enjoy it, boys. Anytime.
John Kurtz with us, 365 Sports.
So did